These crumbling heaps.
Welcome, I'm Sean Spazzato, and this is Inside the Magic's Fallen Attractions Flashback, where we take a look back at some of the world's greatest attractions that used to exist at some of the greatest theme parks. On today's episode, we're turning back time to an attraction famous for taking its guests deep under the sea, to not only take a look at the creatures of the deep, but also a look at the lost city of Atlantis. The 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea attraction used to operate in Fantasyland at Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World. The experience took its guests on a submarine journey underwater. The attraction utilized animatronic sea monsters, scenes of underwater lands, and marine life.
The Nautilus can dive safely below the violence of ocean storms. Surface vessels are not so fortunate.
This attraction was a fun and adventurous experience for guests as they got to travel underwater for the duration of the experience. The ride was guided by Captain Nemo, voiced by Peter Renaday, who was impersonating James Mason from the original film. During the subaquatic excursion, guests would learn and see some of the different kinds of oceanic life living far below the ocean's surface, in addition to taking in uninhabited and historical sites along the way. The 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea adventure began as guests made their way down into the back of the submarine vehicle. Most would have to bend to miss the low-level raised rear hatch. If you weren't careful, you might get a smack in the head, which definitely wouldn't make for a magical beginning to just about any experience. After entering the ship, guests would find their place on board. Following the standard Disney-style introduction and safety notes from the helmsman, the voice of Captain Nemo would begin. Once the submarine cleared the dock, the diving sequence would start, with hundreds of air bubbles filling the porthole view. This would create the illusion of descent. Once clear, the captain introduced himself to his passengers, and then introduced them to the underwater plains around Vulcania.
En route, we will pass beneath the polar ice cap, and then probe depths seldom seen by man.
Guests would see moray eels, crabs, lobsters, sea bass, clams, turtles, and an assortment of smaller tropical fish. Minutes later, in another tribute to the Disney film, an underwater party of divers would come into view. Here you could see animatronics wearing replicas of the Harper Goff-designed deep-sea diving equipment, working on kelp beds and wrangling with rebellious turtles. Hey, someone's got to keep marine life in check. Nothing is worse than a rowdy group of sea turtles.
Proceed on course.
With the bubbles from the waterfall at the cavern entrance simulating a surface storm, the captain would then order the submarine down into the depths as a precaution. Then the guests would enter the show building section of the attraction. Here, guests would be moved to see an ominous graveyard of lost ships. This was to show the devastation natural phenomenon can create within only minutes. The shipwrecks from various centuries littered the seabed and were guarded by silent, gliding figures of sharks. I doubt you'd find any grave robbers in this graveyard.
We raised the polar ice cap, sir. There's a clear channel at 40 fathoms.
Steady as she goes.
Leaving the destruction behind, the Nautilus would reach the North Pole, circumnavigating the polar ice cap from below the surface and narrowly avoiding large icebergs stabbing through the water. Venturing deeper, the Nautilus entered the eerie world of the abyss, where guests viewed examples of the many weird and strange species of deep water fish that thrive in such an environment.
Passed beneath the North Pole and are now descending into that region in deeper water where the sun has never penetrated. Here, in this realm of eternal darkness, nature has provided her creatures with their own eerie luminescence.
49, sir. We've reached maximum depth limit.
Take her back up to 80 fathoms.
80 fathoms.
Rising slightly, one of the final discoveries made was the ruins of Atlantis, along with a typical Disney-fied sea serpent, accompanying mermaids and a treasure bursting with jewels and gold. With the ruins of the ancient civilization soon left behind, the Nautilus would enter the final phase of its journey, a tribute to the most iconic and memorable part of the 1954 Disney film, The Attack of the Giant Squid. Definitely not my most favorite part of the film, but hey, I'm more of a Finding Nemo guy myself.
Charge, aye, aye. Maximum voltage. All ahead.
The passenger submarine would be attacked by long, thrashing tentacles. With a final push to the surface, the Nautilus would clear the caverns of the dangerous Squid and enter the safety of the tropical lagoon on its way towards the dock, bringing the adventure to an end.
We've raised all changes, sir.
Proceed on course. All ahead.
All ahead, aye,
I didn't think I'd ever see you again.
The story of how this attraction came to be started back in 1954 with the release of the film 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. The film was based on the 1870 novel by Jules Verne, which told the tales of a New York-based expedition sent to verify accounts of a mysterious sea monster. What they find is Captain Nemo aboard an unthinkably advanced submarine called the Nautilus. Once aboard, the adventurers came across coral reefs, polar ice caps, and an attack by a giant squid. Now, for some of the younger viewers who have never heard of this film, you have to understand that this film was a really big deal back in the day. In fact, it actually won 2 Academy Awards for Best Art Direction and Best Special Effects.
You may serve them. Your clothes are being dried.
A lot of the film's praise came from one of Walt's most involved artists, who designed the iconic fantasy future Victorian styling of the Nautilus submarine, Harper Goff. The release of this film and all of its recognition all happened right around the same time as the opening of Disneyland. And during this time, Disneyland's Tomorrowland was failing to meet Walt's expectations of what the land should be. So Imagineers decided to bring the sets and the props from the film to Disneyland and have them set up as a walkthrough exhibit in the land, similar to that of Star Wars Launch Bay in Disney's Hollywood Studios. The exhibit lasted for 11 years before it was closed. The organ prop included in the exhibit was moved across the park to the Haunted Mansion to be featured in the attraction's ballroom scene. A little fun fact about this information is that the Walt Disney World version of the Haunted Mansion received a duplicated version of that same organ, so both attractions still hold a piece of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea history to this day.
From the heights to the depths, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands is joining the passengers on our submarine cruise.
In 1959, Disneyland opened Submarine Voyage. This addition to Tomorrowland was the largest expansion in the park's history. It fit perfectly into Tomorrowland for the times of the 1950s, but Imagineers had plans for taking the same attraction and implementing it into Walt Disney World, which wasn't opening until 1971. Submarines were not very futuristic in the 1970s, and so it was decided that the only way they could build the ride in Magic Kingdom was by recasting the attraction as a fantasy adventure, focused not on underlying technology like Submarine Voyage, but on an unbelievable voyage. This unbelievable voyage was that of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
For from their vantage point, they can see the vast areas of water that cover over 70% of the...
To make the subs more entwined with the famous film, the interior of Magic Kingdom subs were outfitted with rivets, cogs, red leather, and bronze portholes. The fleet was also made to be larger than Disneyland's, featuring 12 40-person subs in an 11.5 million gallon lagoon. Imagineers decided the ship's ride would also include onboard narration by Captain Nemo to even further immerse guests into the world of the major film. As you can imagine, this was way before virtual reality was a thing. Like any attraction, this ride had some issues. Because the submarines had guests seated below water level, loading and unloading was a lengthy process. Cast members had to move 40 passengers in and out of the subs through dual stairways on each end of the ship, which allowed one group to exit as another boarded. Due to this design, the ride would face long wait times. Also, the attraction couldn't handle a large capacity of guests. Generally, this attraction could only move 200 people per submarine per hour. When all 9 subs were running, the ride could move up to 14, maybe 1,500 people per hour. But usually, the ride only operated 6 subs, so this meant the ride only moved roughly 1,200 people per hour. If you compare this to Splash and Space Mountain, which are both designed to handle 2,000 people per hour, this is about only half as much. And that is still not compared to Haunted Mansion or Pirates of the Caribbean, which can both handle upwards of 3,000 people per hour. What can I say? This ride definitely wasn't the people mover. Get it? The people mover? See what I did there?
Our sonar hydrophones, we've discovered that fish actually talk. Listen.
Another issue this ride faced was ADA accessibility. This attraction was constructed before ADA accessibility laws came into place, and so it was not required that the attraction provide access to individuals with mobility impairments. Although, this was a real issue for the ride. When people with these impairments wanted to experience the attraction, they were required to transfer out of their wheelchairs and then find some way down the stairs. Whether it be by a friend or family member, regardless, this was a challenging task for many, and because of the ride's design, this could not be changed.
The Aurora Borealis above us.
Ice flow thickening, sir.
As you can probably imagine, it's not very easy to service and repair rides that spend their entire lives submerged underwater. Even the smallest fixes to animatronics or scenery would require the lagoon to be completely drained. Because of this, refurbishments were done not very regularly for this attraction. The ride only went through 3 major refurbishments in its 23-year lifetime at the park. One other issue this ride faced that wasn't really considered during its conception was the fact of how large it was in the park. This attraction maintained 25% of Fantasyland. When considering the fact that Magic Kingdom, like every other theme park, is still a business, they need to get the most bang for their buck out of every square foot of the land in order to maintain good profits. And when considering the fact that this ride had a lower hourly capacity compared to its huge operating budget, maintenance requirements, and ecologically questionable ride system made of diesel engines guzzling massive amounts of fuel, the attraction became even more of a burden on the park. Like every great attraction, this one also had to come to an end.
Tonight, the world of Walt Disney comes alive here in Europe. Live from Paris, we celebrate the creation of a new magical kingdom. With the grand opening of Euro Disney.
In 1992, Disneyland Paris opened and did not perform as well as expected. The resort was not received well and admissions were down. The park's finances crumbled, and the then CEO Michael Eisner became wary of large-scale expansions at the parks, not to make the same mistake of Disneyland Paris. It was ordered that budgets were to be slashed, and executives were brought in to cut costs wherever possible. If only I could afford to bring in someone to cut down on my frivolous costs, specifically my Starbucks purchases. Brought on by my coffee addiction. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea closed for an unexpected and unannounced temporary refurbishment. It was inferred that Disney was using this time to locate a corporate sponsor for the attraction. Unfortunately, in early 1996, Disney announced the temporary closure was in fact going to remain permanent. When it came down to it, 20,000 Leagues was a massive attraction that required a lot of money and energy to run. During this time, the parks were cutting back, and this attraction fell victim to Disney's poor economic climate. Sadly for fans of the ride, there was no official last ride to send it off with a special farewell like most attractions. Instead, people were under the impression that the ride's closing was only temporary, when in fact, it wasn't. After closure, the subs sat in the lagoon for years following. Later, they were pulled from the water and moved backstage at Walt Disney World. This is where their portholes were popped out and sold at the Disney store for $125 each. 2 of the subs were sent to Castaway Cay, the private island Disney stops at during its Disney cruise routes. There, the ships were sunk into a snorkeling lagoon and covered in rope so oceanic organisms and creatures could grow along their exteriors. One of the subs is still there, so any guest visiting Castaway Cay on a Disney cruise can snorkel out to it and see the old and massive 40-person ride vehicle. Some of the other subs were auctioned off to a scrapyard. In July 2004, the the lagoon was buried. The coral, caverns, animatronics, and expansive sets from the ride were demolished. Whatever remained was filled in with dirt and then concrete. Later, a purple-rocked cavern with a cascading waterfall was built at the lagoon's western edge, housing a meet and greet for Ariel from The Little Mermaid. Part of Ariel's grotto, a bronze statue of King Triton, is now located in the lagoon, his trident spraying water toward Ariel's meet and greet. The area, which once belonged to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, is now New Fantasyland and inhabited by Under the Sea, Journey of the Little Mermaid, Be Our Guest Restaurant, and Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. One small nod to the Fallen attraction can be found in the intricate rockwork meant to evoke the seaside caverns beneath Prince Eric's castle, which contain a very unique natural formation hinting at another ship that met its end there. Under the Sea, Journey of the Little Mermaid is almost exactly in the same position as 20,000 Leagues, and in the same shape as well. Now, let's take a look at this Under the Sea adventure as we have the full attraction on video.
Secure ship for sea. Make all preparations for getting underway.
Aye, aye, sir. All hands to station. Sail up all lines. Cast off forward. Cast off aft. Secure hatches and vents. Stand by, engines. All station command, sir. Ship ready for getting underway.
Go ahead, 1/3.
All hands 1/3. Aye, aye.
Stand by to dive.
Diving stations.
Dive. Dive. Get down to sea.
Aye, aye. Trim bow diving planes. 3 degrees down.
Catch her at 10 fathoms.
Aye, aye.
Here she goes.
This is Captain Nemo speaking. Welcome aboard the Nautilus. We are proceeding on a course that will take us on a voyage 20,000 leagues under the sea. En route, we will pass beneath the polar ice cap, and then probe depths seldom seen by man. So make yourselves comfortable, but please remain seated at all times. Here among the reefs, you will see many familiar inhabitants of the undersea world. The great green sea turtles, for instance, are the reptilian patriarchs of the deep. These amphibious descendants of the dinosaur have changed little in the past 200 million years. Groupers, or giant sea bass, roam the coastal bottoms in search of food. The giant clam, obviously, is quite safe from such marine predators. The fish world has always been considered a silent habitat, but with our sonar hydrophones, we've discovered that fish actually talk. Listen.
Steam party ahead, sir. Divers to port and starboard.
Witness the crew from one of our satellite ships. They are harvesting the abundance that nature has sown here beneath the sea. Kelp beds are cultivated, sea creatures corralled and protected from predators, just as terrestrial shepherds protect their flocks from ravenous wolves.
Surface storm ahead, sir.
Weather alert. All controls 8 degrees down. Hold her at 80 fathoms and proceed on course. Nautilus can dive safely below the violence of ocean storms. Surface vessels are not so fortunate. Witness the evidence of their fate. The graveyard of lost ships. For ages, these rotting hulls have kept their secret treasures, safeguarded by silent sentinels of the deep. Man-eating sharks, nature's most unpredictable predators of the sea.
Raise the polar ice cap, sir. There's a clear channel of 40 fathoms.
Steady as she goes. In this region of the polar ice cap, you are witnessing a rare visual phenomenon. The Aurora Borealis above us.
Ice flow thickening, sir.
Take her deep. And keep an eye on the depth gauge. We have passed beneath the North Pole and are now descending into that region in deeper water where the sun has never penetrated. Here, in this realm of eternal darkness, nature has provided her creatures with their own eerie luminescence.
Warning light, sir. We've reached maximum depth limit.
Take her back up to 80 fathoms.
80 fathoms.
There are limits beyond which man and his puny efforts cannot survive. We have almost exceeded those limits.
Unusual formation to port and starboard, sir.
These crumbling heaps of stone betray the hand of man. I believe we've made a startling discovery. These classic ruins could very well be the legendary lost continent of Atlantis. Some scholars theorize that a remarkable civilization was destroyed by a tremendous volcano. Others treat any concept of Atlantis as pure fantasy, along with legends of sea serpents and mermaids.
Begging your pardon, sir, but did you say sea serpents are mere fantasies?
Belay there, mate. Anyone in his right mind knows there's no such thing as a sea serpent or mermaids. Mr. Baxter, if you think you're seeing mermaids and sea monsters, you've been submerged too long.
Captain Nemo, sir. We're experiencing unusual turbulence. It's a ruddy underwater volcano, sir.
By Neptune's flippers, this confirms it. That seething mountain still denies rest to the civilization it submerged thousands of generations ago. Helmsman, steer clear the tottering columns! Red alert!
Red alert! All hands to sleep.
Trim the tanks!
Captain, don't split dead! It's disabled the submarine, sir.
Good Lord! It's one of ours. Its hull has been crushed like an eggshell.
Another monster is attacking forward, sir.
Full repellent charge!
Repellent charge, aye, aye. Maximum voltage.
All ahead! Emergency maneuver. All engines. Stand by to surface. Surface!
Raised all engines, sir.
Proceed on course. All ahead.
All ahead, aye, aye.
Station the maneuvering watch.
Aye, aye, sir. All hands to stations.
gentlemen, in just a few moments we will be docking at Vulcania, our home port. It has been a pleasure having you aboard the Nautilus on this memorable voyage that has taken us 20,000 leagues under the sea. Captain to bridge. Reduce speed and proceed to number 4 berth. Stand by to dock.
Bridge, aye aye. All ahead, run third. Stand by the mooring line.
Thank you for sailing with us. And now, when the cabin lights come on, please stand by to disembark. Gather your belongings, take small children by the hand, and watch your step. All ashore, please. All ashore.
Well, there you have it, a look back at one of Disney's fallen attractions. Thank you so much for joining me on this edition of Inside the Magic's Fallen Attractions Flashback. Be sure to comment below any attractions you'd like to see covered in future episodes. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. See you guys next time.